Sometimes the worst moment of your life happens in a room full of people who could have helped but chose not to. I learned that lesson beneath a ceiling covered in crystal lights and gold accents at one of the most exclusive charity galas in the city. The ballroom looked like something from a movie. Chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Waiters carried silver trays through crowds dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. A live orchestra played softly near the grand staircase, while photographers captured smiles that would appear in magazines the next morning. Everything sparkled. Everything looked perfect. I did not belong there. Not really. My name is Madison Reed, and I was not attending the gala as a guest. I was part of the event staff. Temporary help. One of dozens of people responsible for making the evening run smoothly without ever becoming part of it. I wore a simple black dress provided by the event company and comfortable shoes hidden beneath the fabric. My job was straightforward. Guide guests. Answer questions. Solve problems. Remain invisible. I was very good at that last part. The evening had already stretched past 10 hours. My feet ached. My smile felt practiced. My phone contained 3 unread messages from the nursing facility where my father was recovering after a difficult surgery. Medical bills waited on my kitchen counter at home. Rent was due in 8 days. Life had taught me how to keep moving even when exhaustion settled into my bones. Across the ballroom, powerful people laughed beneath golden lights. Business leaders. Politicians. Celebrities. People whose watches cost more than my car. I adjusted a table setting and reminded myself that I was there to work, not compare my life to theirs. Then everything changed. A woman wearing an elegant diamond necklace approached one of the reserved tables near the center of the ballroom. She looked familiar. The kind of person who regularly appeared on social media and entertainment programs. Beside her stood several guests who seemed eager to impress her. As I passed carrying updated seating cards, she glanced toward me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then she frowned. "Excuse me." I stopped immediately. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes moved from my shoes to my name tag. The silence felt uncomfortable. "You placed these incorrectly." I checked the table assignment. Everything matched the event schedule exactly. "I apologize if there is confusion," I said politely. "I can verify the arrangement." Instead of calming the situation, my answer seemed to make it worse. Her comments became louder. More people turned to look. Several nearby guests watched without saying a word. Heat rushed into my face. I focused on remaining professional while trying to solve a problem that should have taken less than 30 seconds. Around me, conversation slowed. The orchestra continued playing. The lights continued sparkling. Yet suddenly I felt completely alone. I stared briefly at the polished floor because looking up felt impossible. Somewhere above the ballroom, hidden behind private observation windows reserved for the host of the event, security cameras quietly recorded every second. And high above the crowd, a man who owned the entire evening had just paused an important conversation because a single face in the ballroom had caught his attention. By the time the gala finally ended, midnight had already passed. The orchestra packed away their instruments. Guests drifted toward waiting cars beneath the glow of streetlights. Event staff cleared tables and gathered decorations while the ballroom slowly returned to silence. To everyone else, it had been another successful evening. To me, it felt like the longest night of the year. I loaded equipment into storage carts and tried to focus on work. That was easier than replaying the embarrassing scene in my head. Every time I remembered the crowd watching, my stomach tightened. By 1 o'clock in the morning, I finally stepped outside. Cool air brushed against my face. The city looked different after midnight. Quieter. More honest. My aging sedan waited across the parking lot beneath a flickering light. Before climbing inside, I checked my phone. Another message from the nursing facility. "Your father had a good evening. No concerns tonight." Relief washed through me immediately. Small victories mattered. Lately, they seemed to be the only kind I could afford. I drove home through nearly empty streets and reached my apartment a little before 2. The building was old. The elevator rarely worked. The hallway lights buzzed constantly. Yet it was home. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter and immediately noticed the stack of envelopes waiting there. medical bills, utility notices, insurance statements. Responsibilities never slept. I sat down and rubbed my tired eyes. For a moment, exhaustion felt heavier than everything else combined. Meanwhile, across the city, Damien Russo remained awake. High above downtown, inside a private office overlooking the river, several executives continued discussing business matters connected to the gala. Donations, partnerships, future projects. Nobody expected Damien to be distracted. Yet his attention remained fixed on a security monitor displaying recorded footage from earlier that evening. The ballroom scene played again. Madison Reed standing beside the table. Madison Reed trying to remain professional. Madison Reed carrying the weight of a situation she did not create. Damien watched the recording without speaking. Finally, one executive shifted uncomfortably. "Is there a problem?" Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he replayed the footage one more time. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Who is she?" The room fell silent. A staff member quickly opened event records. Madison Reed, temporary event coordinator, 27 years old. Damien listened carefully. "How long has she worked with the company?" "Almost 2 years. Mostly contract assignments." His gaze remained on the paused image. Something about her expression stayed with him. Not frustration. Not anger. Familiarity. The look of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations alone. The look of someone nobody bothered to ask about afterward. Damien had seen that expression before. Long ago. Before wealth. Before influence. Before power changed how the world treated him. He stood and adjusted his jacket. "I want a meeting arranged." Several executives exchanged confused looks. With Ms. Reed, one finally asked. "Yes." Another silence followed. Then came the obvious question. "May we ask why?" Damien looked once more toward the frozen image on the screen. His answer came calmly. Because everyone in that room noticed the situation. His eyes narrowed slightly. She looked like the only person who believed nobody noticed her. At that exact moment, sitting alone in my small apartment surrounded by unpaid bills and unfinished worries, I had no idea that one of the most powerful men in the city had just changed tomorrow's schedule because of me. The next morning, I arrived at the event company's downtown office 20 minutes early. Anxiety had always been more dependable than any alarm clock. The building itself was ordinary. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a reception desk that had seen better years. Nothing about it suggested that one of the most powerful men in the city would be involved in my day. I was reviewing schedules for upcoming assignments when my supervisor appeared at my desk. The expression on her face immediately made my stomach tighten. "Madison," she said carefully, "someone wants to meet with you." I looked up. "A client?" She hesitated. "Not exactly." My pulse quickened. Every possible disaster rushed through my mind. Maybe there had been a complaint about the gala. Maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I was about to lose one of the few steady sources of income one had left. "Who is it?" I asked. My supervisor lowered her voice. "Damien Russo." For a second, I thought she was joking. Nobody laughed. The room suddenly felt smaller. Everyone knew the name. Business leaders knew it. Politicians knew it. Entire industries adjusted plans when Damien Russo made a decision. The idea that he wanted to meet with me made absolutely no sense. 30 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the back seat of a black sedan traveling toward one of the tallest buildings in the city. My hands remained folded tightly in my lap. The ride seemed to last forever. When the elevator finally carried me to the top floor, I stepped into a private office unlike anything I had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river. Sunlight reflected across polished wood floors. Modern artwork decorated the walls. Everything felt quiet, expensive, intentional. An assistant guided me into a conference room before quietly closing the door behind me. A few moments later, Damien entered. Dark suit, calm expression, confident without appearing arrogant. He carried himself like a man accustomed to people listening the moment he spoke. "Ms. Reed." His voice was steady. "Thank you for coming." I stood immediately. "Of course." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." Once we were both seated, silence settled across the room. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Damien pressed a button on a remote resting on the table. A large screen illuminated behind him. The moment I saw the image, my stomach dropped. Security footage from the gala. The ballroom. The table. Me. Heat rushed into my face. I wanted to disappear. The recording played from beginning to end. Every awkward second. Every uncomfortable glance. Every moment I had spent trying not to become the center of attention. When it finished, Damien paused the screen. "Tell me something, Madison." I swallowed. "Yes." His eyes remained on the image for a moment before returning to me. "Why did you apologize?" I blinked. "What?" He leaned back slightly. "You apologized several times." His voice remained calm. "For a situation you did not create." I looked down at my hands. Nobody had ever asked me that question before. Not once. Because it seemed easier, I admitted quietly. Damien studied me for several seconds. Then he shook his head. "No." The single word surprised me. Respect should never require someone to make themselves smaller. The room became completely silent. For the first time since arriving, I looked directly at him. And something told me this meeting was not happening because of a seating chart. It was happening because he had noticed something nobody else bothered to see. For several moments after Damien spoke, neither of us said anything. The city stretched beyond the glass walls behind him, sunlight reflecting across office towers and busy streets far below. Up here, everything seemed distant from the life I knew. Bills. Long shifts. Hospital visits. Endless worries. Yet somehow, sitting across from him, I felt more seen than I had in years. I lowered my gaze toward the conference table. "Most people do not like problems," I said quietly. Damien leaned back in his chair. "And you believe you are a problem?" The question caught me off guard. "No, not exactly." I paused. "I just think life becomes easier when you avoid making things harder for other people." A faint crease appeared between his brows. "That sounds exhausting." Before I could answer, he was already right. Exhausting was exactly the word. For years, I had spent more energy protecting everyone else's comfort than protecting my own peace. Damien remained silent for a moment. Then his attention shifted toward my tote bag resting beside the chair. A folder peeked out from the top. Medical paperwork. Insurance forms. Documents I had forgotten to hide. Embarrassment immediately washed over me. I reached down and adjusted the bag. Damien pretended not to notice. Somehow that small act of courtesy made me trust him more. An assistant entered carrying coffee and bottled water. After placing them on the table, she quietly left. Damien slid a bottle toward me. "You look tired, Madison." The observation surprised me. Most people noticed whether I smiled. Very few noticed when I was struggling. I laughed softly. "That obvious?" Only to someone paying attention. The answer settled somewhere deep inside me. Damien stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the river. "Do you know what I learned after attending thousands of events?" he asked. "What?" He folded his hands behind his back. "The people who receive the most recognition are rarely the ones carrying the most responsibility." I thought about that. It felt true. The people who make everything work often leave through side doors while everyone else takes credit. His gaze remained fixed on the skyline. That has always bothered me. For the first time, I saw something beyond the confidence and authority everyone associated with Damien Russo. I saw understanding. Real understanding. He turned toward me again. "Tell me honestly." My pulse quickened slightly. "Okay." "After the gala ended, did anyone ask if you were all right?" The question hit harder than I expected. Images flashed through my mind. Cleaning tables. Loading equipment. Driving home alone. Sitting beside a pile of unpaid bills in a silent apartment. I swallowed carefully. "No." Damien nodded once, as if he already knew the answer. The silence that followed felt strangely comforting. Not because he solved anything. Not because my problems disappeared. But because somebody had finally asked. For years, I had become accustomed to carrying everything quietly. Yet, sitting in that room, I realized something important. Sometimes the first step toward changing a life is not money, influence, or opportunity. Sometimes it is simply being reminded that your struggles matter to someone. And as I prepared to leave that office, I had the unmistakable feeling that this conversation was only the beginning of something neither of us fully understood yet. When the meeting finally ended, I expected to leave with answers. Instead, I left carrying something far more dangerous. Hope. It followed me all the way down the elevator and into the busy streets below. Hope sat beside me during the drive home. Hope waited with me in hospital corridors while doctors checked on my father. Hope even followed me into my tiny apartment where unpaid bills still covered part of the kitchen table. Nothing in my life had changed. Yet somehow everything felt different. 3 days later, I received a call from the nursing facility just before sunrise. My father needed additional therapy sessions. The insurance company would only cover part of the cost. I closed my eyes and stared at the ceiling above my bed. Another expense. Another problem. Another reminder that responsibility never rested. By the time I arrived at work, exhaustion hung over me like a storm cloud. The event company office buzzed with activity. Phones rang. Schedules changed. Clients made impossible requests. Everyone rushed from one task to another. I focused on staying productive. It was easier than thinking. Around lunchtime, my supervisor approached my desk carrying a small package. "This arrived for you." I looked up in confusion. "For me?" She nodded. The box was simple. No company logo. No decoration. Just my name written neatly across the front. Curiosity replaced my fatigue. Once my supervisor walked away, I carefully opened it. Inside was a leather journal. Dark blue. Elegant. Professional. Tucked beneath the cover was a handwritten note. For simple words. "Write down your future." My breath caught. There was no signature. None was necessary. I immediately recognized the handwriting. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. The journal itself was not extravagant. It was not expensive enough to impress anyone. Yet somehow it felt more meaningful than anything money could buy. Most people looked at me and saw a temporary employee. Someone passing through life quietly. Damien seemed to see possibilities I had stopped seeing myself. That evening, after visiting my father, I sat alone at my kitchen table and opened the journal. The first page remained blank for several minutes. Then I picked up a pen. At first, the goals were practical. Pay off medical debt. Build an emergency savings account. Find stable employment. But the longer I stared at the page, the more honest I became. Learn confidence. Stop apologizing for everything. Believe I deserve better. The final sentence took the longest to write. Create a life that feels larger than survival. Once the words appeared on paper, I could not stop looking at them. They felt impossible. They also felt true. Across the city, in an office overlooking thousands of lights, Damien Rousseau was finishing another meeting. Powerful people discussed investments and expansion plans. Millions of dollars moved through conversations happening around him. Yet for a brief moment, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. Toward a young woman carrying responsibilities nobody should carry alone. Toward someone who had spent years believing she mattered less than everyone around her. Neither of us knew it yet, but the journal would become the first step toward changing far more than either of our lives. Because sometimes the most important gift is not an opportunity. Sometimes it is a reason to imagine a future worth reaching for. The journal became part of my daily routine. Every morning before work, I opened it and wrote one small goal. Some goals were practical. Return phone calls. Save $20. Visit dad after work. Others felt more personal. Speak with confidence. Stop assuming the worst. Trust myself. None of it changed my circumstances overnight, but it changed the way I moved through them. For the first time in years, I felt as though I was walking toward something instead of simply surviving another day. Nearly a month passed before I saw the woman from the gala again. The event company had assigned me to another high-profile fundraiser held at a luxury waterfront venue. The evening air carried the scent of fresh flowers and ocean breeze. String lights reflected across the water while guests gathered beneath elegant white tents. It should have felt beautiful. Instead, The moment I recognized her stepping from a black town car, my stomach tightened. She looked exactly the same. Confident. Impeccably dressed. Completely certain the world would make room for her. For a brief second, old fears returned. The memories of that night rushed back. The stares. The embarrassment. The feeling of being smaller than everyone around me. Then I remembered the journal. I remembered Damien's words. Respect should never require someone to make themselves smaller. I took a slow breath and continued working. The event began smoothly. Guests arrived. Speeches were scheduled. Tables were perfectly arranged. Everything moved according to plan until the woman approached the registration area where I was assisting attendees. Her eyes found me immediately. Recognition flashed across her face. "You again," she said. The words were not loud, but several nearby guests heard them. Weeks earlier, I would have felt my confidence disappear. This time, I simply smiled professionally. "Good evening. Welcome to the event." She seemed almost disappointed by my calm response. I expected someone more experienced to be handling guest relations. The comment hung in the air. A few people glanced toward us. Waiting. Watching. I felt the familiar temptation to apologize. To explain myself. To make everyone comfortable. Instead, I stood a little straighter. "If there is anything you need assistance with, I will be happy to help." My voice remained steady. Professional. Respectful. The reaction surprised her. She had expected discomfort. She had expected weakness. Instead, she found neither. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she gave a small shrug and moved on toward the reception area. The entire interaction lasted less than a minute. Yet when it ended, I realized something important. The biggest difference was not her behavior. The biggest difference was mine. Later that evening, as the event continued around us, I caught myself smiling. Not because the night was perfect. Not because my problems had disappeared. But because I finally understood that confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the decision not to surrender to it. Somewhere across the venue, standing on an elevated terrace overlooking the water, Damien Rousseau had just arrived for the evening. And before the night was over, he would witness a version of Madison Reed he had been hoping to see all along. The fundraiser continued beneath strings of warm lights stretching across the waterfront like stars suspended above the evening. Conversations drifted through the air. Glasses clinked softly. Waves rolled against the marina beyond the venue. To everyone else, it was simply another successful event. To me, it felt like a turning point I could not fully explain. After my interaction with the woman from the gala, I returned to work and focused on guests. Yet something had changed. For the first time, I had chosen confidence instead of apology. The realization stayed with me throughout the evening. Nearly an hour later, a series of speeches began near the main stage. Donors gathered around reserved tables while photographers positioned themselves near the front. I was helping coordinate seating adjustments when I noticed a familiar figure approaching from the terrace overlooking the water. Damien Rousseau moved through the crowd without drawing attention to himself, though attention followed him anyway. Power had a way of doing that. He exchanged greetings with organizers and sponsors before taking a seat near the front. The event director soon stepped onto the stage and thanked everyone for attending. Applause followed. Several awards were presented. Donations were announced. Then an unexpected moment arrived. The director smiled toward the audience. "Before we conclude this evening, there is one person I would like to recognize." I barely paid attention at first. Events often included surprise acknowledgments. Then I heard my name. My heart nearly stopped. Madison Reed. Confusion washed over me as heads turned throughout the venue. The director continued. "Many people see successful events and assume they happen effortlessly. What they rarely see are the individuals whose professionalism makes everything possible." I stood frozen beside a registration table. The room felt impossibly quiet. Over the past year, Madison has worked countless events for our organization. Her dedication, kindness, and reliability have earned the respect of everyone who works alongside her. Applause began spreading across the venue. Genuine applause. Not polite. Not forced. Real. My face immediately grew warm. For years I had worked behind the scenes, invisible by design. Suddenly hundreds of people were standing and recognizing contributions nobody usually noticed. The director motioned for me to come forward. My legs felt strangely unsteady as I crossed the floor. When I reached the stage, the applause continued. I glanced across the audience and found Damien watching from his table. He was not applauding louder than anyone else. He was simply smiling. A quiet smile, the kind that carried pride rather than attention. The director handed me a small crystal award recognizing excellence in event service. It was not expensive. It was not life-changing. Yet as I held it beneath the lights, emotion tightened my throat. Because the award represented something far more important. It represented being seen. After the presentation ended, guests returned to their conversations. The evening slowly resumed its rhythm. As I stepped away from the stage, Damien approached. "Congratulations, Madison." His voice remained calm as always. "You earned that." I looked down at the award in my hands, then back at him. "Did you know about this?" A faint smile appeared. "I may have supported the recommendation." I laughed softly despite myself. Of course he had. Damien's expression grew thoughtful. "Recognition does not change who you are." His eyes met mine. "It simply reminds everyone else to notice." Standing beneath the glow of waterfront lights, surrounded by people who finally saw me differently, I realized the most important decision Damien had made was never about protecting me. It was about helping me discover that I no longer needed permission to recognize my own worth. The Crystal Award sat on a shelf above my kitchen table for the next several weeks. Every morning, I saw it before leaving for work. Every evening, I saw it when I returned home. At first, it felt strange. Recognition had never been part of my life. Responsibility was familiar. Sacrifice was familiar. Worry was familiar. Recognition was not. Yet slowly, something inside me began to change. I stopped apologizing when I asked questions. I stopped assuming my opinion mattered less than everyone else's. I stopped entering rooms as though I needed permission to be there. The changes were small, almost invisible, but they were real. My father noticed first. One afternoon, while visiting him at the rehabilitation center, he studied me carefully across a small table in the common room. Sunlight streamed through nearby windows while other families visited loved ones around us. "You look different," he said. I smiled. "Different how?" He leaned back slightly. "Lighter." The answer caught me by surprise. For a moment, I did not know what to say. Then I realized he was right. The constant weight I had carried for years was beginning to feel less overwhelming. Not because life had become easier, because I had become stronger. A few days later, I received an unexpected invitation. A leadership development program sponsored by several major organizations across the city. The event company had nominated me based on recent performance reviews. When I read the email, my first reaction was disbelief. My second reaction was fear. People like me did not belong in leadership programs. At least that was what the old version of Madison Reed would have believed. The new version opened her journal and wrote 4 words. "Say yes before fear." 2 weeks later, I found myself attending the first session inside a modern conference center overlooking the harbor. Professionals from dozens of industries filled the room. Managers, directors, entrepreneurs, people who seemed far more accomplished than I was. For the first hour, insecurity tried to convince me I did not belong there. Then I remembered something Damien once said. Recognition does not change who you are. It simply reminds everyone else to notice. By lunchtime, I was contributing to discussions. By the end of the afternoon, I was presenting ideas to complete strangers without my voice shaking. As participants gathered near the outdoor terrace during a break, I stepped outside to enjoy the fresh air. Boats drifted across the harbor below. The sky stretched endlessly above the water. "You look exactly where you belong." The familiar voice made me smile before I even turned around. Damien stood near the doorway holding a cup of coffee. "That is new," I said. "What is?" 6 months ago, I would have assumed you were being polite." A faint smile appeared. "And now?" I looked around the terrace. Around the people. Around the future I had once been too afraid to imagine. Now I think you might actually be right. Something warm appeared in Damien's eyes. Not surprise. Satisfaction. As though this was the outcome he had hoped for all along. Standing beside the harbor with the afternoon sun reflecting across the water, I realized the most important transformation was not professional. It was personal. For the first time in my life, I was no longer trying to become someone worthy of respect. I was finally learning that I already was. 8 months later, the city gathered once again beneath thousands of lights. Another charity gala filled the grand ballroom of the waterfront venue. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors. Music drifted through the air. Guests arrived in elegant evening attire, while photographers captured the celebration. The scene looked remarkably similar to the night that had changed my life. Yet everything felt different now. I was no longer a temporary worker trying to disappear into the background. I had recently accepted a full-time leadership position overseeing event operations for one of the largest organizations in the city. My father had completed his rehabilitation program and returned home. The stack of overdue bills that once dominated my kitchen table had slowly disappeared. Most importantly, I no longer measured my worth through the opinions of strangers. As I walked through the ballroom greeting guests and coordinating final details, I noticed something that made me stop. Near the center of the room stood the same table where months earlier I had felt completely invisible. For a moment, memories returned. The embarrassment, the loneliness, the belief that nobody cared. Then I smiled. Because that version of Madison Reed felt like someone I used to know, not someone I still was. The evening continued beautifully. Donations exceeded expectations. Guests applauded inspiring speeches. Laughter filled the room. Eventually, the orchestra began playing a slower piece as attendees moved toward the dance floor. I stepped aside near the balcony overlooking the harbor and watched the reflections dancing across the water below. You always disappear when the event is successful. The familiar voice made me laugh softly. Damien Russo joined me beside the railing. Time had changed many things, but not that calm confidence. Old habits, I admitted. He looked out across the harbor. You know, when I first saw you, you spent most of your time trying not to be noticed. I smiled. I remember. Damien turned toward me. Now look at you. For a second, neither of us spoke. We did not need to. The answer surrounded us. Confidence. Purpose. Growth. A future that once felt impossible. Music drifted from the ballroom behind us. Guests celebrated another successful evening. Somewhere in the crowd, people who had once overlooked me now greeted me with respect. Damien nodded toward the dance floor. You should be in there. I laughed. Giving orders? Taking credit. The answer surprised me. I am still getting used to that. A faint smile appeared. You earned it. We stood quietly for a moment longer. Then I looked back toward the ballroom filled with light, music, and possibility. Everything had started because one powerful man chose to notice a girl everyone else ignored. But the happy ending was not about being rescued. It was about being reminded of my own value. Damien had opened a door. I had walked through it. As the orchestra continued playing and the city lights shimmered beyond the harbor, I realized something simple and beautiful. The night that once felt like the worst moment of my life had become the beginning of the best chapter. And sometimes destiny arrives disguised as a moment you never would have chosen, only to lead you exactly where you were meant to be.